Welcome. The material you shared with us today brings us to a discussion that is, it's one of profound tragedy.
Hmm.
We're talking about the murder of 19-year-old Sade Robinson in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Yes. And we should say right at the top, we recognize how sensitive and incredibly difficult this subject matter is.
Absolutely. The sources we have, they meticulously detail the end of a very young woman's life. And then there's the swift and just devastating investigation that followed.
And not just the investigation, but the legal proceedings
Mhm.
against the accused, Maxwell Anderson. And then what I think is a crucial part of this story, the powerful, unified response from the Milwaukee community.
Right. So our mission here is really clear. We want to conduct a thorough, factual analysis of this record that's been provided.
Just sticking to the facts.
Exactly. We want to understand the exact sequence of events as they unfolded in the spring of 2024, the specific legal charges, which are heavy, and of course, the definitive outcome of the trial.
It is challenging material, and I think it's important to approach this with the solemnity it deserves.
Of course, our genuine sympathy goes out to Sade Robinson and her family as we navigate what is a truly painful record.
And that sense of difficulty is paramount.
Hmm.
You know, when you look at the scope of the information here, what immediately set this case apart, what drew such intense legal and public attention, it wasn't just the tragic loss of life.
No.
It was the documented severity of the subsequent acts, the very nature of the crime itself. When you study the timeline laid out in these documents, you see how quickly a seemingly routine missing persons report just transformed.
And exploded.
Yes, into a major high-profile homicide investigation involving an extreme level of brutality. And that rapid escalation, that's what fundamentally changed how law enforcement, the media, and the community treated the case from day one.
That's such a critical starting point, the sheer speed with which the worst possible fears were confirmed. Okay, let's unpack these sources now. And let's begin with who Sade Robinson was, according to the records we have. Sade Carlina Robinson, she was a college student really embedded in her community in Milwaukee.
Just starting out.
She was born on May 10th, 2004, and the sources indicate her life was tragically cut short on or around April 1st or 2nd of 2024.
Which means she was only 19 years old.
19. It's hard to reconcile that. She was just beginning her adult life.
It truly is. The sources, they really highlight her status as a college student in Milwaukee, which, you know, it immediately places her in this hopeful, formative phase of her life.
Building a future.
Exactly. A young person building her education and her future in the city.
Yeah.
But the records also ground her identity with a very relatable detail. She was employed locally.
She worked at Pizza Shuttle.
Right. And this detail, it might seem minor in isolation, but it actually becomes a really profound focus point for the community later on. It shows where she was known, where she had regular interactions, and, you know, where her sudden absence would be immediately and intensely felt by her friends and coworkers.
That employment detail is so important. It connects her to the working fabric of the community, doesn't it? It moves her story beyond just an abstract tragedy and into the reality of a life that was known and loved right there in Milwaukee. Now, focusing on her final confirmed hours, the sources established that Robinson and the suspect, Maxwell Stephen Anderson, were seen going on a date.
Yes, and the context of this date is also provided. The sources confirm they met at a seafood restaurant. And there's a connection to Anderson here.
He used to work there.
It was an establishment where he himself had previously worked. This suggests a level of familiarity with the venue, and it establishes that their interaction right before the tragedy was deliberate and planned. It sets the trajectory for the events that followed.
And the journey from that date to the official missing person report was just devastatingly short. Robinson was reported missing on April 2, 2024.
And this is the moment. This is where the timeline shifts from troubling to, well, to outright horrifying.
Because the records show that the first discovery of human remains was made that very same day, April 2nd.
That speed is truly what gives this case its staggering gravity. I mean, typically, a missing person report is filed, and it triggers a structured but often lengthy search process.
Right. It can take days, weeks even.
Exactly. For the investigation to pivot almost instantaneously from looking for a living person to a full-scale recovery operation, within hours of the report being filed, it speaks to the immediate dark realization law enforcement must have had when that first discovery was made.
They knew right away.
It signaled an immediate crime of the highest order.
Let's talk about that transition, because it's not just that remains were found, but where they were found and how that immediately began to map out the geography of this horrible crime.
The timeline of discovery is detailed in these sources. It just paints an almost unbelievable picture of premeditation and violence. As we said, on April 2, 2024, the investigation gets its first grim confirmation.
A severed human leg was found in a park nearby.
And the sources confirm the immediate action taken by investigators. Preliminary DNA testing was rushed,
And that testing confirmed the remains belonged to Sade Robinson.
which confirmed her identity and, perhaps more terrifyingly, the nature of the crime dismemberment, within just hours of her being reported missing. That confirmation alone elevated the case instantly.
Absolutely. I mean, when the crime involves dismemberment, the entire scope of the investigation has to change, right?
Oh, completely. It's no longer concentrated in a single location, like a home or an initial crime scene. The search immediately expands to multiple locations. It demands the kind of resources and coordination you see in only the most high-profile investigations.
And the sources say this search for her remains continued for weeks.
Weeks. And it spanned multiple geographically separate locations, which just confirms the complexity of what they were dealing with.
And we see that tragic continuity in the records a few weeks later. On April 18th, 2024, a passerby along a Lake Michigan beach, a pretty considerable distance from that initial discovery, made another terrible find.
A torso and an arm were recovered.
The sheer physical distance between the park and this Lake Michigan beach finding is significant, isn't it?
It implies intentional, widespread disposal of evidence. Lake Michigan is an enormous body of water, and the fact that these remains washed ashore speaks volumes about the suspect's effort to scatter the evidence over a massive area. The investigation at this point wasn't just local.
It was regional.
It's regional, yes.
And the search didn't even stop there. Nearly a full month after the torso was found, on May 16, 2024, yet another discovery was made.
A human arm was found along the shoreline at Waukegan Municipal Beach.
Waukegan, which is in Illinois.
And Waukegan is in Illinois. This is crucial. When you connect this to the bigger picture, the widespread geographical dispersion of her remains, from a Milwaukee park to a beach in the metro area and then across a state line into Illinois, it just underscores the horrific extent of the mutilation.
And the attempt to evade detection.
A deliberate attempt to make the physical evidence virtually impossible to contain or collect. This element of cross-jurisdictional evidence disposal is precisely what led to those formal legal charges being filed.
That evidence scattered across 2 states, it must have been instrumental in confirming that secondary charge, mutilating a corpse. What does this imply about how the police were approaching the evidence gathering?
Well, the very nature of the discoveries meant that investigators had to rely heavily on modern technology. They were likely using cell phone data, vehicle tracking, things like that, to establish a geographical path of the suspect during those critical hours between the evening of April 1st and the reporting time on April 2nd.
So they weren't looking for just one crime scene.
No, they would have been mapping a disposal route. The successful confirmation of remains across 3 distinct geographical locations, the park, the Milwaukee beach, and the Illinois beach. It shows that they built an overwhelming forensic case that tied the suspect to these locations.
Shifting to the legal ramifications of that, the dismemberment, the sources quote the assistant district attorney describing the killing and the dismemberment of Sade Robinson as the highest level of violence imaginable. How does that specific language translate legally? It's not just inflammatory, is it?
No, that phrase is not just rhetoric. It's a legal contextualization. When you charge first-degree intentional homicide, the focus is on proving the intent to kill.
Okay.
But the separate charge of mutilating a corpse addresses the depravity and the intentional destruction of evidence after death. In Wisconsin, the elements for that second charge are severe. It requires proof that the defendant acted knowingly to dismember or disfigure the body.
And the discovery of remains scattered across multiple locations provided that proof.
It provided irrefutable proof of this specific separate criminal act. This tells the court that the violence didn't end with the murder, it escalated afterward. And that justifies the prosecutor's use of that powerful, evocative language about the extreme level of brutality.
The investigation had to have moved incredibly fast to connect all these geographically diverse pieces of evidence back to one single person. Let's look now at the profile of the individual they arrested. So we turn our attention to the individual arrested and charged, Maxwell Stephen Anderson. The records provide some key details about his identity and where he lived.
Anderson was 33 years old at the time of the crime, born in May of 1990. The sources establish him as a longtime resident of Waukesha County, Wisconsin, specifically residing in Pewaukee.
Which places him in the broader Milwaukee metropolitan area, though not the city proper.
Correct. It highlights that he was rooted in the region, which is significant when you look at his prior interactions and, well, his knowledge of local geography.
His arrest was remarkably swift. It happened on April 4th, 2024, just 2 days after the first remains were found. And he was held in custody until he was formally charged on April 12th.
That gap between the arrest and the formal charging is telling. The arrest on the 4th indicates police had sufficient probable cause to detain him immediately. That was likely based on cell phone data, witness interviews, or maybe vehicle evidence from the date.
But then there were 8 days until the charges were filed.
Right. And those subsequent 8 days before the formal charges of first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and arson were filed. That indicates the time required to synthesize the forensic evidence, to process the initial DNA results, and build the detailed complaint necessary for those specific severe felony charges.
The records also shed some light on his employment history, noting he worked as a bartender at several Milwaukee establishments in recent years.
Which helps explain his familiarity with the social scene and locations, including that seafood restaurant where he took Robinson.
Yes, and the records also include a detail about his military service. Anderson served briefly in the United States Navy from April 2011 to January 2012.
And the source material is careful here. It maintains factual neutrality, noting that the circumstances of his departure remain unclear. And this is important for you, the listener, to understand. We can state the fact of the service, but the lack of clarity on the reason for that short duration means we can't speculate on its relevance to his character or behavior.
Right. Shifting to his history, the records paint a pretty clear, decades-long pattern of legal trouble leading up to this ultimate crime. Anderson had a documented past criminal record spanning from 2014 to 2022 across both Waukesha and Dork counties.
And this documented history is essential to understanding the man the jury saw. The prior offenses listed in the sources, they include domestic abuse, drunk driving, and disorderly conduct.
So this isn't just a list of minor speeding tickets.
Not at all. These are sustained instances of aggressive behavior, recklessness with the drunk driving, and a clear history of poor impulse control, particularly evidenced by that domestic abuse charge.
I wonder, what kind of weight does a pattern of behavior like that? Prior instances of aggression and recklessness carry in a murder trial, especially when it gets to the sentencing phase.
That history is extremely significant, even if the prior offenses are technically separate from the homicide itself. During a trial, prosecutors can sometimes use what are called prior bad acts statutes, though they're often most impactful during sentencing.
How so?
A history involving domestic abuse suggests repeated choices, a willingness to engage in intimate violence. This pattern strongly suggests to the court that the defendant exhibits an ingrained disregard for legal and societal boundaries. It argues against any mitigation during sentencing and helps the court justify the most severe penalty, a life sentence, by painting a picture of escalating violent tendencies that culminated in this one extreme act.
Let's talk about a specific piece of evidence that, at least initially, really dominated the conversation. The records discuss the police search of Anderson's home where officers reportedly found blood on the walls. That detail, when it was released, must have seemed like a slam dunk.
It was indeed a shocking, crucial, and ultimately a very subtle detail in the investigation. This raises an important point of forensic clarity that the sources emphasize and that you, the listener, really need to grasp.
Which is?
The blood found was tested and determined not to be Sade Robinson's blood.
That is a vital clarification. Without it, the public narrative is completely skewed.
Exactly. Police reports later confirmed it was canine blood. This is essential for accurately understanding the evidence that was presented. A defense attorney might have tried to exploit the confusion around that initial blood discovery to sow doubt about the immediate crime scene.
But the forensics cleared it up.
But the forensic testing confirmed the blood was irrelevant to the homicide charge. The strength of the conviction ultimately relied on the physical disposal evidence, the scattered remains, the geographical data tracking his movements, and possibly other evidence linking him to the disposal sites, not the blood found in his home. It just highlights how important forensic testing is to eliminate these circumstantial, misleading initial findings.
And despite the overwhelming and frankly terrifying nature of the physical evidence, the dismemberment across multiple jurisdictions, one central element remains officially absent from the record we reviewed.
Motive.
Anderson's motive for killing Robinson remains unknown. The sources do not elaborate on a reason or any explanation that was presented during the legal process.
And the lack of an articulated motive is often disturbing to the public because we crave a rational explanation for irrational violence. In legal terms, however, while motive can strengthen a narrative, it is not a required element for a conviction in a first-degree intentional homicide case.
They just have to prove intent.
The prosecution has to prove intent to kill, and they proved that through the methodical, violent acts that were described. The absence of a stated motive simply underscores the apparent senselessness of the crime. It's a void that the court and the community are just forced to contend with.
We can transition now from the investigation itself to the finality delivered by the judicial system. So the legal process, despite the complexity of all that evidence, it moved forward and culminated in a swift conclusion in the summer of 2025. The source material traces the key dates that delivered justice in this case.
The pivotal moment was, of course, the jury's decision. On June 6, 2025, after reviewing that staggering timeline of evidence, the scattered remains, the forensic connections, the testimony, the jury found Maxwell Anderson guilty on all counts.
A guilty on all counts verdict is extremely significant in a case like this, with multiple heavy charges. It confirms the jury was convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Anderson acted with premeditation for the homicide charge.
But critically, it also confirmed they believed he willfully and systematically carried out the extensive and horrific acts of dismemberment and the destruction of evidence related to the arson charge.
And that comprehensive conviction, it cleared the path for the maximum possible penalty.
It did. The final sentencing details are provided in the source. On August 1st, 2025, Anderson was sentenced to life in prison for the murder. Wisconsin doesn't have capital punishment, so this is the ultimate judicial penalty available for a crime of this magnitude.
And a life sentence signifies the legal system's recognition of the unparalleled severity and brutality of this homicide.
Yes, and the long-lasting societal damage it caused.
And the sources confirm his current status. Maxwell Anderson is currently incarcerated at Dodge Correctional Institution in Waupun. That concludes the judicial timeline.
And with the conviction secured and the life sentence handed down, the sources allow us to shift our focus. We can move from the sterile mechanical details of the law and the timeline of the crime to the immense, lasting human impact.
Which is a vital transition.
It is, because it reveals how the community grappled with the pain and how they sought to honor the victim's memory beyond just the court's judgment.
That shift is powerful. The legal system provides a certain kind of closure for the court, but the community has to find its own way to navigate the grief. The response from the Milwaukee community to Sade Robinson's murder, as it's documented in the sources, was immediate, intense, and profoundly focused on honoring her memory.
And on actively reclaiming her narrative from the sheer violence of her death.
Yes, the shock and the horror generated by a crime of this nature, especially one involving a promising young college student, it galvanized this public outpouring of grief and remembrance.
It was both spontaneous and deeply meaningful.
One of the earliest and most symbolic acts was this community-led event they organized, known as a pink out. Dozens of community members gathered to create a makeshift memorial. And what makes this response so remarkable, really an act of communal defiance, is the location they chose.
Anderson's front lawn.
His front lawn.
The choice of location is an intentional reclaiming of space. It was a visible, public, and deliberate act to define the perpetrator's last known free residence, not as a source of terror, but as a site of tribute to the victim. It was, in a sense, a form of community-led restorative justice.
And the records detail the specific items they used. Balloons, posters, flowers, stuffed animals.
And the sources highlight that very specific, personal element used in the memorial. The items were primarily pink.
Because pink was Sade Robinson's favorite color.
Exactly. And this small, deeply personal detail, it ensured that the memorial transcended generic grief. It became a vibrant personal celebration of her life, ensuring her personality and her preference remained central to the narrative, rather than just the brutality of the crime.
And the memorializing wasn't confined just to that dramatic symbolic action at the suspect's house. The sources also confirmed that tributes and memorials were created at Pizza Shuttle,
the Milwaukee restaurant where she worked.
Right. And that shows the immediate local recognition of her presence in her daily life. It reinforces that she was a vital, known, functional member of the community whose absence was just acutely felt by her peers.
It's also a striking detail in the sources that the expressions of sympathy extended across the entire periphery of this tragedy.
You're talking about Anderson's father.
Yes. The records mention the explicit expression of condolences and sympathy for the Robinson family from Anderson's own father. This is an extremely rare and profoundly human detail to find
Yeah.
documented in the context of such a high-profile, heinous crime.
It really is. It indicates a split between the actions of the son and the conscience of the family who were forced to reckon with his unimaginable acts.
It demonstrates a recognition of the total, irreversible damage that transcends the legal battle. That kind of public statement from the perpetrator's immediate family, it just speaks volumes about the universality of the grief and the shock.
And Robinson's legacy, as documented in the sources, has been cemented into the city's landscape now, moving beyond those temporary memorials. In September of 2024, months after the initial shock, a permanent mural of Sade Robinson was painted.
On a wall near the entrance of Pizza Shuttle.
That mural serves as such a critical, lasting tribute. It's not simply a temporary collection of items, it's a permanent piece of public art that transforms the memory of the tragedy into a visible, enduring presence.
It ensures her life and memory remain vibrant in the city where she is building her future. It transforms a site associated with her day-to-day work into a landmark of remembrance and resilience for the entire community.
And this momentum, this move toward remembrance and advocacy, it clearly led to a more structural organization of that grief. The records detail the formation of an organization called Sade's Voice Foundation.
The creation of Sade's Voice Foundation is arguably the ultimate embodiment of the ongoing impact of this case. The sources indicate this foundation was founded specifically in response to the murder.
And that organizational response is critical, isn't it? It formalizes the community's focus, shifting from merely grieving the crime to actively pursuing lasting change and advocacy in her name.
It transforms an unimaginable negative event into a functional, positive legacy, one focused on protecting and serving the community she was a part of.
The sources, by detailing the formation of this foundation, they really show the community refusing to let her story be defined simply by the violence committed against her.
Precisely. They are using the collective pain to fuel tangible, proactive measures, the kind of structural response that attempts to ensure that the memory of Sade Robinson serves as a constant, functional call for awareness and protection within Milwaukee.
So, to summarize this factual analysis, we've traced the devastating events surrounding the murder of 19-year-old Sade Robinson. We started with her disappearance on April 10, 2024, and the immediate, terrifying discovery of her remains across multiple jurisdictions.
And we followed that trail through the arrest and the definitive conviction of Maxwell Anderson on charges including first-degree intentional homicide and mutilating a corpse, which, of course, resulted in a life sentence.
The legal outcome provides a definitive closure to the court case, but the sources also ensure we recognize that the pain and the loss are ongoing.
We've meticulously analyzed the public record, the facts of the crime, the history of the perpetrator, and the solemn yet powerful response from the community, which was characterized by symbolic actions like the pink-out and lasting physical tributes like the mural.
And the dedication of that community, demonstrated through those memorials and the structural organization of Sade's Voice Foundation, it just shows a powerful desire to center Sade Robinson's story on the life she lived, rather than solely on the violence of her death.
And the formation of lasting organizations, built in the aftermath of extreme personal tragedy, offers a final, reflective thought for you, the listener, to consider. When communities are forced to confront shocking, incomprehensible acts of violence, the organizational and emotional response often crystallizes very rapidly. The enduring question this material leaves us with is this: what is the mechanism by which collective, immense sorrow transforms into an engine for sustained, structural advocacy? The source material implies that this capacity to turn deep grief into a functioning organization is the ultimate and most resilient form of legacy a community can create in the victim's name. This process is where the knowledge of her tragedy is applied to prevent future ones.
A difficult but necessary exploration of the record. Thanks for listening.